All right, Terry, welcome to Relentless Pressure Stories of Resilience. Resilience is the theme. Um, Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, first of all, Giancarlo, let me say thank you for having me on. I'm looking forward to talking with you. My name is Terry Tucker. I was born and raised on the south side of Chicago. I'm the oldest of three boys. You cannot tell this from my voice or looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall, and actually went to college on a basketball scholarship at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina. When I graduated from college, I moved home. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I did find that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I lived with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mother care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After Wendy's, I actually went to work for the hospital that cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball. We lived in Texas, but for the last 12 plus years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. And I guess just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, is a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Wow. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the hostage negotiation. So, I mean, these are very intense scenarios. Walk us through, like, what do you do in those scenarios?
Well, when I first got on the team, I remember they gave me a formula, and the formula had to do with how we communicate with each other. And the formula was 73855. And once you understand how we communicate, you understand why they give me the formula. 7% of how we communicate with each other are the words that we use. And think how many times you thought, oh gosh, I wish I hadn't said it, or I wish I'd had said something differently. That's only 7% of how we communicate a message. 38% is the tone of voice that we use. Are we excited? Are we depressed? Are we emotional? And then 55% of how we communicate a message. So more than half of how we communicate something is our body language and our facial expressions. And the reason they gave us that formula is to make us understand that if somebody had barricaded themselves or they had a gun and were holding hostages, we were not in the room with that person. We were either on the outside of the door trying to talk through a door or talking on the phone blocks away. So we did not have the luxury of that 55% of saying something to them and see them kind of roll their eyes like, oh, what an idiot. I can't believe he said that to me.
Right.
So we had to get good, certainly at figuring things out based on what people were saying, but also what they weren't saying and how they were saying it. So we would start out using what was called basically tactical empathy. And I think for anybody listening to us today, get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. It's like, hi, I'm Terry. Help me to understand what's going on today. And the key word there is understand. If I
Like,
was
connect with them on a human level.
yeah, exactly. And if I was negotiating with a homicide suspect, I wasn't going to agree with them. I wasn't going to say what they did was right. But by basically gaining that empathy builds trust, and trust gets me to a point where I can hopefully get them out safely.
Right. And in those scenarios, I mean, okay, so they gave you a formula. What was your success rate like in those scenarios?
90%. I mean, we
Really?
were very good at eventually getting people out. About 10% of the time, like I said, if I'm negotiating with a homicide suspect, the building is surrounded, they're talking to me, they know they're not going to get away.
Right.
And they know also that they don't want to spend the rest of their life in prison. So it was their decision to end their life. So about 10% of the time, the people we negotiated with said, I'm not going back to jail, I'm not going back to prison, and I'm going to end it right here. And while that was always tragic, and I don't mean to sound callous or cruel about this, I never lost any sleep over that
Right.
because I knew I had great training, I worked with great people, and I did everything I could to get them out
Yeah.
safe.
And they put themselves in that position.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Is there ever a scenario where you guys come to some sort of agreement where, let's say initially, I mean, these people are looking at spending the rest of their lives in prison because of what they were engaging in, but during this hostage negotiation deal, did you guys ever come to a deal where perhaps instead of spending the rest of their life in prison, you guys are like, if you come out of there and no one gets harmed, you're only going to spend, I don't know, 5 years, for example? No, right? So
No,
you guys don't give in, you don't cave in.
that's not our job. I mean,
Right.
that's a judge or a jury to decide how much time they get. That we had no control over that.
Right. Your goal is just to get the hostages out safely, and there are no deals made.
I mean, there are some deals. And one thing we never did is we never lied to people. People would say to us, hey, I'll come out, but you've got to promise me I'm not going to go to jail.
Right, because you see it in movies where it's like, oh, we want a helicopter and this and that, and
Well,
that
and
usually
you would
doesn't
get
happen.
that. I mean, you would get, I want a pizza or I want a pack of cigarettes or I want
Right, right,
a, we would never give anybody anything without getting anything because this whole thing, this whole relationship, just like any relationship you have in your life, is about trust. And
right.
can I trust you? And I'll give you a quick funny story. We were not a full-time SWAT team, so we carried pagers. Again, I'm going to date myself. And so we end up getting called out to to a response. I get down the scene. I'm talking to the uniform guy. I was like, "What's the deal?" It's like he's drunk. He's barricaded in his house with a gun, and his wife is the hostage. I'm like, "Okay, do you have him on the phone?" I said, "Sure." So I said, let me talk to him. So we start talking, and usually it's hours into these negotiations when you start talking about coming out or solution based. But I just had a gut feel with this guy, and I said, "What would it take for you to let your wife go and for you to come out?" And there was this long pause, and he said, "Give me a beer." And I said, "If I gave you a beer, do I have your word you would let your wife go and you would come out?" He said, "Do I have your word I could drink it?" And I said, "Absolutely." And so he said, "Then I'll let my wife go." So I gave $5 to one of the uniform guys. They went down, got a beer from the store. The tactical team put it on the front porch. I called him back. I said, "Your beer's on the front porch, but you don't get it until you let your wife go and you come out." And he hit me up again with, "Do I have your word I can drink it?" I said, "You absolutely have my word." All of a sudden, the front door comes flying open. Here comes his wife with her hands up. Here he comes with his hands up. We handcuff him, let him drink his beer, and off to jail he went.
Wow. Oh man, so many problems could have been avoided if he just got that beer.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay, so hostage negotiator, obviously you were, I mean, in terms of pressure, I mean, that's the whole job, right? Dealing with pressure. What was the biggest takeaway from that career? That you were able to apply to business and your everyday life.
It's funny. I have all these skills. We ask how and what questions. We stay away from why questions because why questions sound accusatory. We mimic emotions and things like that. But I'm not emotionally involved with you. I mean, I'm down in the weeds with you. Don't get me wrong. If you hate your mother, we're talking about how much you hate your mother. But I don't know your mother. I don't hate your mother. But you learn all this stuff, and then you go home, and your 2 year old takes a glass of milk and turns it upside down, and pours it all over the floor. And all of a sudden, everything you've learned on how you negotiate with somebody goes out the window because now the emotional
The
dad takes
emotions,
over.
right?
And and that's just it. When we're start negotiating, their emotional brain way up in the air, their rational brain way down on the ground. And over those hours, you hope to get to the point where your rational brain is up in the air and your emotional brain is down on the ground because we all know we make better decisions for ourselves with our rational brain versus our emotional brain.
Right, right. So, okay. To go a little further back, before that, so you said you played basketball, D1 basketball. How was your experience with that?
Oh, it's great. I mean, I had 3 knee surgery in high school, so the odds of ever playing college basketball, let alone D1 basketball, was, I mean, something I was just incredibly fortunate to play. My senior year in college, we played against North Carolina and Michael Jordan, 1982, the year North Carolina won the national championship. And then the following night, we played against Jim Valvano and North Carolina State, who the following year, 1983, they win the national championship. So without
Wow.
realizing it, over the course of one weekend, we got to play against two national championship teams. It was a tremendous experience.
What an experience being able to play with legends, and you didn't really know it at the time, right?
You didn't. I mean, James Worthy was North Carolina's big gun. I mean, he's in the Hall of Fame as well, but compared to Michael Jordan was just starting out. He was just a freshman. So,
Right.
yeah.
Wow, what an incredible experience. And okay, so you played basketball, hostage negotiator. What else? Keep walking us through your journey.
Yeah, hostage negotiation, and after that, I started a school security consulting
That's right.
business.
Okay.
And probably the most one of the most difficult jobs I ever had in my life was I was a girls' high school basketball coach. I mean, I had no sisters. I have two brothers. One pitched for the University of Notre Dame. The other one was drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the National Basketball Association. So you can imagine, when my wife gets pregnant, we go to the doctor, and the doctor says, "Do you want to know the sex?" And I said, "Sure." And the doctor says, "You should buy pink." I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no. You need to leave it in there till it's done." I have no idea what to do with a girl, but fortunately or unfortunately, our daughter got my height, and she actually went to the Air Force Academy to play basketball.
Oh wow. I'm sure you're very proud of her.
Incredibly proud.
Yeah, that's amazing. Um, okay. So seems like you're well accomplished. It's fascinating to see how much you can accomplish in one lifetime, right?
It is, but I'll be honest with you, and I've said this. I mean, I've had terminal cancer for 12 years, and I say I've probably done more living in the 12 years that I've been dying than I've done in my entire life. And as you just said, I've had a pretty good life up to the point I got cancer.
Right. And what was the feeling when you first learned you had cancer?
I mean, I think I went through all the emotions that we would associate uh, with grief when we find out. I mean, as I mentioned, my dad was dying of cancer when I graduated from college. I learned a lot during that process. I took care of myself. I've been an athlete. I was seeing my doctor. I was eating right. I was doing everything right. And now I got this rare form of cancer. And first it was denial. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done
Right.
everything right in my life. And then you get angry. I can't possibly have cancer. I've done everything right in my life. And then our daughter was in high school when I was diagnosed, and it was sort of a bargaining with God. Hey, just let me live long enough to see her graduate from high school. And then I got to a point where I absolutely got down, felt sorry for myself, was depressed. And then, Giancarlo, I just got to a point where it was like, this sucks, but I'm going to have to embrace the suck. I do not like these cards that I've been dealt, but I'm going to have to play these cards to the best of my ability. And that's what I've been trying to do for the last 12 plus years now.
Right. So it seems like you went through the stages of grief, of finding out that you had this that you had cancer. That's terrifying. That would terrify anyone. I don't care who you are. So obviously you have to go through treatments, which I'm sure was very uncomfortable. What kind of treatments did you have to go through?
So when I was initially diagnosed, I have a rare form of melanoma that appears on
Right.
the bottom of the feet or the palms of the hands. And most people think of melanoma as too much exposure to the sun.
Right.
My form has nothing to do with sun exposure. And so in 2012, I was basically told, you'll be dead in 2 years. We have nothing to offer you other than surgery. No therapies, no drugs, nothing like that. I thought, well, okay, you gave me a death sentence. Maybe I could turn that death sentence into a life sentence. And the first thing my oncologist did was put me on a drug called interferon, of which I took a weekly injection. And that gave me terrible flu-like symptoms for 2 to 3 days every week after those injections. And I took those weekly injections for almost 5 years.
Wow.
And, imagine just having a horrible case of the flu every week for 5 years. And as my oncologist said, I mean, all we're trying to do is kick the can down the road. This isn't a cure. This isn't going to, prevent it from coming back. And eventually it became so toxic to my body, I ended up in the intensive care unit with a body temperature of 108 degrees, which is usually not compatible with being alive. And somehow I survived that. So that was what they first put me on. And then 5 years of that takes me to 2018. I end up having to have my left foot amputated. Cancer works its way up my leg into my shin. 2019, two more surgeries, and then right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, I find out my entire lower leg is full of cancer, and I have tumors in my lungs. So during COVID, I ended up having to have my leg amputated above the knee, and I'm still being treated today for the tumors that I have in my lungs.
Wow. I mean, that's the sequence of events there. I mean, it seems like, I mean, just having the flu once, right? Once a year is very uncomfortable. You do feel like you feel like you're dying. It's a bad feeling when it's a very strong flu. But to have that every week, I mean, that would break most people. You know, it
Well, I
really would.
remember Yeah, I remember telling my oncologist because interferon is also used for people who have hepatitis. And one of the players, I just happened to get cancer when I was coaching basketball. One of my players' grandmothers was on interferon. And so I remember talking to her about it. And she said, "Yeah, I'm on it for a couple months to kind of get this hepatitis out of my liver." And so I go marching into my oncologist's office. Like, yeah, I can do it for a couple of months. And I remember she looked at me and she said, "I'd like you to do it for 5 years." And I looked at her and I said, that's just not humanly possible. That's how can you even ask somebody to do that? And I know she was like, Terry, I got nothing else for you. So you either do it or go ahead and make your final arrangements and stuff like that. And she did. She basically said, do it for as long as you can. Well, okay.
How do you cope with it? How do you deal with it?
I mean, if you would ask me at that point in time what my goals were, I'd have been like, goals? Goals, I just want to get out of bed and I want to make it to the
Right.
couch. That was literally a goal. And I got to a point where I was so sick of being sick that I literally prayed to die. You know, I kind of felt there were sort of two camps. There was the people that were living, and then there was the people who just weren't dying. And I kind of felt I was in that second camp. I'm not really living. I'm not contributing
No,
to
your
my
quality of
family.
life. I mean, there
Yeah,
is no quality of
there
life.
is no quality of
If you
life.
have a flu every week, there is no
Yeah,
quality of
there
life.
is no quality of life. And that's so it was like, come on, God, all right, just take me out of this. At least let my family move on with their lives. But I have a very strong faith life, and I
Yeah,
mean, he
you
helps me
said
get.
God. So at any point did you lose faith in God, lose faith in religion, or did you stay with it the whole process?
Oh, there's I've never lost faith in it. I remember after I had my leg amputated and had these tumors in my lungs, my doctor showed me my CAT scan. And I don't know how to read a CAT scan. I have no medical background, but you can kind of look at it and be like, oh, well, that sure doesn't look like it belongs there. I had these big tumors in my lungs. I had fluid all around the pleural spaces. I was, without being gross, I was coughing up green, bloody phlegm. And I remember looking at my doctor and saying, how was I alive? And I will never forget this. He put his head down, he shook his head no, and then he looked up at me and he said, I don't know, because you shouldn't have been, which said to me, God's not done with me yet. You know, when I die, where I die, how I die, way above my pay grade. Spend much more time focused on the living, not so much on the dying.
Right. So you clearly have purpose. There's a reason why you're here, and I'm glad you're here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be speaking to you. Uh, so you have a company called Motivational Check. Well, what's motivational check?
It's really just the arm that I use when I write books, articles, and speak. It's just motivational check came from my days in law enforcement, so it's really the company I use to write and speak.
Okay. And what kind of events do you do?
I mean, I've done you know, banking conventions, I've done sales conventions, I've done webinars with people that are looking to change jobs, change careers in their life, and things like that. I've done sports teams, high school teams, things like that. I'll pretty much speak to just about anybody who's interested. I love that interaction with other people because I don't get it very often. You know, being in a wheelchair, not having a leg, it's very hard to get out of the house and things like that.
Right. Again, I mean, finding purpose is, I mean, it's everything. A lot of people that are depressed feel like they've lost all hope, right? Especially when they're going through something like you did. You know, purpose can really pull them out of that situation. So it seems like you know, you have something to look forward to. And it does bring you happiness when you do these events, which is great. Um, and you have some tips for people. You have four truths to help others. What are they?
I do. I've come up with these. I have them on a post-it note here in my office. So I see them multiple times during the day and they constantly get reinforced in my mind. And the first one is control your mind, or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you stronger and more resilient. The third one I look at kind of as I guess, a legacy type of truth. And it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave into the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one I think is pretty self explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I kind of call these four truths sort of the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to try to start to build a quality life from.
Right. I mean, they're all great. I mean, especially embracing the pain and difficulty. I mean, that's something that I wish my younger self would have understood during difficult moments, where it's okay to sit with it, to experience the pain rather than trying to um repress it, or trying to avoid the pain, whether it be intangible or actual physical pain. Mostly just like the intangible pain, right? Like a heartbreak or something like that, you try to escape. um so I think that's very important. Being able to having the ability to embrace the pain is very important if you want to be a resilient individual, if you want to be able to overcome adversity. um so yeah, and controlling your mind. I mean, controlling your thoughts during difficult times. I mean, that's it's very difficult. Do you meditate?
I don't. I pray.
You pray?
I
Okay.
pray, and I also, I'm alone. I like being alone with my thoughts. There's a great book called "Do Hard Things." It's written by a guy by the name of Steve Magnus, and Magnus
Okay.
used to be the head track and field coach at the University of Minnesota. And in the book, he talks about a psychologist at the University of Minnesota that did an experiment with basically undergraduates, so kids that are in college, and he put them in a room, and the only thing in the room was a table and a chair, and he wouldn't let them have any devices or even a pen, nothing at all. The only other thing in the room was a buzzer, and the buzzer was on the table, and if you pressed the buzzer, you received an electric shock. 68% of the men, 25% of the women shocked themselves, including one guy that shocked himself every 5 seconds for the basically 15 to 20 minutes that they were asked to be in there. And the conclusion of the study was basically, we're not comfortable in our own heads, we're not comfortable in our own minds. And I don't feel I'm in that category, but every day I spend about 10 or 15 minutes unplugged, just sitting, not meditating, not praying, just sitting and letting my mind go wherever it goes. I mean, we talk a lot about thoughts, and thoughts are things that they just come into our minds,
Yeah.
whatever they are. Maybe it's the pizza you had last night, or the party you're going to next weekend, whatever it is. It just comes in and it goes. Thinking is where we get in trouble, where we start thinking about those thoughts and what they mean in our lives. So thoughts are kind of neutral. Thinking is where we get into trouble.
Yeah, I mean, thoughts are, when you actually think about what is a thought, right? Whenever I sit around and just I have no phone, no TV, nothing. It's like a flow of thoughts, right? Like a river
Mhm.
of thoughts. And then I wonder, I'm like, are some of these my thoughts? Because it's good thoughts, bad thoughts. And then I've learned over the years that sometimes, you have to be able to just like bat them away, right? Like as they come to you, some are positive, the negative ones, I'll acknowledge it, but then just kind of bat it away. It's like, no, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm just going to focus on the positivity of life. um so yeah, it kind of seems like you do like it's kind of like a dopamine detox, where you don't look at your phone, um you don't look at the TV, you just sit with your thoughts, and that's not easy. It's not easy at all.
I mean, for old people like me, it is. I
Right,
mean,
right.
honestly, for younger people, it's not, because so many of them get their identity, based on that little device in their hand. Somebody liked what I was wearing today, or somebody didn't like the way my hair looked today, or whatever it is. And you care about that for some reason. And so many people care about what others think. And I always kind of thought, well, why do you care what other people think when those people have never even failed in the things that you've attempted in your life? Why do you care about that? I mean, it's a rhetorical question, especially when you're young. You want to be part of the group. You want to,
Right.
you want to be on the inside, and I get why.
You don't want to be ostracized. You
You
want
don't. You
right.
don't.
And
Especially when you're young. You don't have the confidence.
that's how we survived as a species, being,
Yeah.
being liked, being accepted by the tribe, whatever you want to call it. Um and being ostracized is usually an indicator that you did something that was upsetting to the tribe. So, I think we just evolved that way. And with technology, it just becomes such a big part of our lives. We have this symbiotic relationship with it. And especially I'm a millennial, but Gen Z and the generations to come, they don't know time without these devices, without the internet or social media. Because I grew when I grew up, there was no social media, so I knew what it was like to have to go outside into the real world and go look for your friends, get on the bike, go knock on their door. Hey, do you want to play? You want to play some basketball? Want to play some baseball, soccer, whatever it is? But today's generation, they don't know that. It's all on their phone, but it's fake. It's not real. It's not as satisfying.
It's surface. It's
Right.
surface level, and I think we need to go deeper. And I'll never forget one of the nurses who takes care of me is a former hospice nurse. For those of your audience who don't know about hospice, it's people who take care of others at the end of their life. And she gave me this book to read, and the book was called Imagine Heaven, and it's basically a book about people who have near death experiences. And learned a lot from the book. But one of the big things I learned was that no matter who the person having the near death experience saw, almost everybody got asked one question. And that question was, how do you treat my people? In other words, how do we treat each other? How do we care for each other? And there's a professor at the University of Chicago who does this experiment with his students, and he does it himself. He'll make them and himself go out and get on a bus. And he said, in 3 questions, I want to be deep with somebody. So, you get out and you sit down next to somebody. It's like, hey, how's it going? Question number one. Oh, that's fine. How are you? Good. So question number two, what do you do for a living? And I'm just making this up. I'm a doctor. Oh, question three, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm. I wanted to be a vet. I loved animals. I wanted, but XYZ happened. I became a doctor. Yeah, I always wanted to be a doctor. My dad was a doctor. Whatever it ends up being. Now you're deep with somebody. Now you're getting to their values and why they do what they do and things like that. And you're right. Social media doesn't allow you to do that. Doesn't allow you to go deep. It's all on the surface.
Yeah, and it misleads you. It leads you to believe that everyone is living this amazing lifestyle that sure, I mean, it's curated. So you're just putting the good stuff, and there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, that's how I use social media. I only put out what I want you to see,
Right.
and that's the way it should be, I think. There's nothing necessarily wrong with it, but I think when you're younger, again, when I was in high school, when I was in middle school, there was no social media. So I think growing up, the younger generations probably experience a lot of what they call FOMO, like fear of missing out. So
Mhm.
they see their friends going to parties, getting invited to hang out, and then maybe they don't. Therefore, they feel left out. They feel like they're being ostracized. So it can lead to negative feelings. And as you can imagine, bullying back in the
Mhm.
day, if you get bullied in school, it stays there. It
Right.
doesn't follow you home, but now it does. It follows you everywhere you go. And it's weird times we live in. And yeah, the connections are superficial. It's very superficial. It doesn't always get past that, right? When you're communicating with someone on the internet, um, this is why I love doing this podcast. It's a new podcast, but this is a great way to connect to people on a human level, get to know let's hear about your background. Let's what scares you, what motivates you, etc. So yeah, it's been a cool experience so far doing this. um okay, so you mentioned books. You wrote a book, correct?
Wrote a book, wrote a chapter in another book, and I'm just about ready to come out with a second book.
All right, so go ahead and let's talk about your books real quick.
Yeah, I mean, the first book, never wanted to write a book, never, expected to write a book. There's kind of an old joke that says we talk to God, it's called prayer. When God talks to us, it's called schizophrenia. So, God has never said, hey, Terry, write a book. But I think what God has done, and I think this has happened to me several times in my life, where he puts enough people in my path that start making the same suggestion over and over and over. And I think at this point in my life, I'm smart enough to pay attention to those things when they occur. So the first book I wrote was called Sustainable Excellence: 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. And it was really a book born out of two conversations I had. One was with a former player. As I mentioned, I coached girls high school basketball and lived in Texas, who had moved to Colorado with her fiance. And my wife and she and her fiance and I had dinner one night. And I remember saying to her after dinner that I was excited now that she was living close and I could watch her find and live her purpose. And Giancarlo, she got real quiet for a while. And then she looked at me and she said, well, Coach, what do you think my purpose is? I said, I have absolutely no idea what your purpose is, but that's what your life should be about. Finding the reason or reasons you were put on the face of this earth. And there are reasons, using your unique gifts and talents and living that reason. And then the second conversation was with a young man who reached out to me on social media. And he said, what do you think are the most important things that I need to learn, not to just be successful in my job or in business, but to be successful in life? And I didn't want to give him that, get up early, work hard, help others. I didn't want to give him sort of the cliches that we all know. So I spent some time taking some notes and eventually kind of had these 10 thoughts, these 10 ideas, these 10 principles. So I sent them to him. And then I stepped back and I said, well, I got a life story that fits underneath this particular principle, or I know somebody whose life emulates this principle. So literally during the 4 to 5 month period where I was healing after I had my leg amputated, I sat down at the computer every day and I built stories, and there are real stories about real people underneath each of the principles. That's how sustainable excellence came to be.
That sounds great. And where can I buy your book? Where can I find
Anywhere
it?
you can get it online, Amazon,
Amazon.
yeah,
Okay.
barnesandnoble.com, Apple, wherever you can get a book online, you can get sustainable excellence.
Sweet. Awesome. And you said it took you approximately 5 months to write it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I've been writing this last book for almost a year now. And it's, when I wrote the first book, I wasn't on all the drugs that I'm on to prevent the cancer. And so I'm having a much more difficult time, with sort of that chemo fog and things like that, where, there's a word, I don't know what the word is. I wish the word would, it's been much harder to write this second book now, but it'll get there. I mean, I'm not in any particular time frame, and I still don't even have a title for it yet. So we'll
Right.
see what happens.
It'll come at the right time.
It will. You're absolutely right. You're right.
Okay. Terry, to wrap it up, I like to ask this question. So think of the darkest moments in your life, um, and where you experience the most amount of pressure, and what advice would you give yourself at that time?
I guess I will tell you a story that I think that helped me through this time. It's a true story. It happened back in the 1950s at Johns Hopkins University. There was a professor who did an experiment with rats. And as soon as I start telling a rat story, everybody's like, wait a minute, you're going to tell a rat story. I said, yeah, but trust me, it's a great story. He took rats and he put them in a tank of water that was over their head. And he wanted to see how long the average rat could tread water. The average rat treaded water for about 15 minutes. And just as those rats were getting ready to sink and drown, he reached in, grabbed them, pulled them out, dried them off, and let them rest for a while. And then he took the exact same rats and put them back in that exact same tank of water. And the second time around, on average, those rats treaded water for 60 hours. Now think about that. The first time, 15 minutes. I mean, it's not like your business is going to fail, your marriage is going to fail, you're going to flunk a test. You're going to die. Your life is going to be over. And the second time around, 60 hours, which taught me two things. Number one, the importance of hope in our lives, that if we know we're doing the right thing, we know we're moving in the right direction, maybe not today, maybe not this month, maybe not even this year, but at some point in time, there's a good chance we might get to where we want to be. And the second thing it taught me was just how much more our physical bodies can handle than we ever thought. I mean, don't get me wrong, I think we all have a breaking point, but I think that breaking point is so much further down the road. And it kind of comes back to that first truth of controlling your mind. We stop, we quit, we give up because our brain's telling us this hurts, this is uncomfortable. If you can push through that, if you can keep going, you can do so much more. And I'm a living example of that. To survive what I've survived and to have almost died as many times as I have, I mean, one, I think it's God's will, but I also think I was able to push through that. And anybody who's listening to us can do that because I am the biggest wimp in the world. So if I can
No,
do it,
I don't think you're a wimp. I mean, you were a D1 athlete. I'm sure you had some very intense. I played sports growing up, just up to high school, but and then after I've done jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai, and I've done CrossFit, Spartan races and stuff like that. So I know it is possible to go past that breaking point, because a lot of it's just in your mind, right? Again, there is literally a breaking point, but it's not when your mind tells you it is.
no,
It is.
no.
It's not even close. Because if there was someone chasing you with a gun or a knife, you would keep going, right? So, I mean, you could easily go another 10, 20% if you really had to, if your life depended on it. So, no, you're definitely not a wimp. You're a D1 athlete. That's who you are. You have that fighter spirit in you. And so again, it's just talking to you, it doesn't seem like you're going through anything. That's admirable. Like the your energy levels, how optimistic you are. um do you what does your diet look like? Are you eating healthy or
Yeah, I am. And I mean, we talked about purpose, and
right,
this is a purpose. And that's one thing I learned from my dying father. You need to have a purpose in life. And
right,
and this is my purpose. And this
right,
gives me energy. And my wife and I absolutely we kind of butt heads from time to time. It's like you need to rest, your blood counts are low and stuff like that. And my
right,
response is I get plenty of rest when I'm dead. Doing things like this energizes me. It gives me that purpose. I do. I mean, I'm very careful what I eat, drink, things like that. I mean, one of the tools my doctor used to use to diagnose my cancer was a PET scan. And with a PET scan, they inject you with radioactive sugar, with the idea being that cancer cells have a higher metabolism. They'll pick up that sugar at a higher rate, and that's what glows on a scan. I mean, nobody told me this, but I thought, well, if cancer likes sugar, maybe I should stop, with the ice cream and the desserts. And so I did. I don't eat bread. I don't do desserts. I don't drink soda. I don't drink alcohol. I drink water. I mean, I'm very careful what I put into my body to give myself as much energy as I can. I mean, I just finished therapy last week, a whole week of therapy. And so I'm pretty beat up right now. But
right.
again, this gives me purpose.
That's amazing. Yeah, whenever I go on a sugar detox, just not necessarily remove it 100%
Right.
because fruits and there's sugar everywhere, but trying to avoid processed foods that have added sugar, I feel so much better. I do. My energy levels are, not only do they go up, but they're stable, they're consistent throughout the day. So yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that cancer, it seems like cancer depends on sugar a bit. I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised, and that just motivated me to continue going down this sugar detox route. And your energy levels, this conversation gave me, it gave me motivation to go to the gym and just to continue living a healthy life, because if you're able to have that level of optimism despite what you're going through, there's absolutely no excuse for me or for anyone listening right now.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I
Yeah,
mean, you talk about the detox. I mean, my daughter and her husband and my wife and I will do, like, no sugar November or something like that. I mean, just do it for 30 days.
right.
I mean, you don't have to like deprive yourself, but do it for 30 days and see, like you said, how much better you feel when you get a lot of that processed sugar out of your body.
Absolutely. Well, Terry, it's been amazing interviewing you. You're a great human being. I hope I can interview you again down the road. Again, so your book, Sustainable Excellence, it's available pretty much everywhere, Amazon.
Yeah.
Do you have a website?
I do. I have a website called Motivational Check. So motivationalcheck.com. You can reach out, leave me a message. I love to talk to folks. So please feel free to do that.
Perfect. Thank you.